The letter shook in Jonah Creed's hands, not from the cold but from what it hinted at. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. One line was enough to keep him awake long after the fire burned low. She's running from something. And if she stays alive, it'll be because the man she marries can stand between her and hell. Jonah folded the paper slowly, his jaw tight. He had spent years making sure no one stood close enough to him to need saving. Now a stranger was coming anyway. A woman, a wife, and whatever secret had followed her all the way west. 5 days later, the stagecoach creaked to a stop in front of his ranch, and the moment her eyes met his, Jonah knew sleep would not come easily again. The wind cut across the high plains of eastern Montana, sharp and restless, carrying the promise of an early, unforgiving winter. Jonah Creed stood on the porch of the house he'd built with his own hands. Thick logs, narrow windows, a place meant to endure, not to welcome. At 36, his hair was already threaded with gray, his face carved by years of war and worse peace. People in town spoke his name carefully, some with respect, some with fear. He'd earned both. After the war, he'd hunted men who thought the frontier meant freedom from consequence. When he finally stopped, he'd come here, far from roads and opinions, determined to build something that didn't bleed. The coach driver tipped his hat and hurried down, eager to unload and leave before dark. Jonah stayed where he was, posture loose, eyes alert. She stepped down slowly. Lydia Hale was smaller than he expected, wrapped in a plain brown traveling dress, her gloved hands tight around a single carpet bag. Her spine was straight despite the exhaustion in her face. Dark auburn hair was pulled back severe and neat, as if control itself were armor. Then she looked up. Her eyes were green, deep and wary, holding the kind of quiet fear Jonah recognized instantly, the kind learned, not imagined. "Mr. Creed," she said. Her voice was low, steady, and careful. "Thank you for agreeing to this." He nodded once. "Mrs. Hale?" The driver set down one modest trunk and didn't linger. The sound of the departing coach faded fast, leaving only wind and silence. Jonah picked up the trunk. It was light, too light to hold a full life. Inside, the house was clean but bare. A table, chairs, a stone hearth. No softness anywhere. He showed her to the small back bedroom, the one he'd cleared of tools and ammunition. A narrow bed, a repaired dresser, a bright quilt that didn't belong to anything else in the room. "It's enough," Lydia said quietly before he could apologize. They spoke plainly. No false promises, no illusions. She would have her own room, her own space. He would expect nothing from her beyond honesty and work if she wished it. She listened without interrupting, eyes steady. When night settled in and the fire cracked low, Jonah left her to unpack. The house felt different already. Less empty, less safe. He didn't know yet that before dawn, her secret would tear through that fragile calm and wake something. Violent and protective, he'd sworn was buried for good. Jonah built the fire higher after she closed her door, feeding it until the room warmed and the logs settled into a steady burn. He poured a measure of whiskey but didn't drink it. Just held the glass, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving through his house. Drawers opening, fabric brushing wood, careful footsteps, light but deliberate. He ate standing up, dried beef and bread the way he always had. The clock on the wall ticked loud in the quiet. When it struck 9, he told himself to sleep. He didn't. The scream came just after midnight. It ripped through the house, sharp and sudden, full of raw terror. Jonah was moving before the sound fully registered. His pistol was in his hand by instinct, heart pounding, every sense narrowed to threat. He reached her door in 3 strides and threw it open. There was no intruder. Lydia was alone, tangled in the quilt, thrashing as if fighting someone only she could see. Her face was wet with tears, her breath broken, her voice pleading into the dark. "No, please, please don't." Jonah holstered the gun slowly. He knew this place, knew the look of a mind caught somewhere else, reliving something it couldn't escape. "Mrs. Hale," he said, firm but low. "Lydia, you're safe. You're here. You're awake." Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a heartbeat, she didn't recognize him. Then awareness crashed in, followed by shame so deep it tightened Jonah's chest. "I'm sorry," she gasped, pulling the quilt up as if to hide. "I didn't mean to wake you." I don't usually—" "Don't apologize," he said. He stepped back, giving her space. "Nightmares don't ask permission." She was shaking hard now, teeth chattering though the room was warm. Jonah fetched water and a tin of tea leaves she'd brought, hands steady from long habit. When he returned, she was sitting upright, lamp-lit, her face pale but composed. She accepted the cup with trembling fingers. They sat in silence. The fire popped softly down the hall. Finally, she spoke without looking at him. "I should tell you. Before morning. You don't have to. I do." She drew a breath that seemed to cost her. "My husband was not a good man." Jonah didn't move. "I was 17 when I married him," she continued, voice flat and controlled. "I had nowhere else to go. He seemed like safety." Her fingers tightened on the cup. "The first time he hurt me was our wedding night." Jonah's jaw locked. "For 6 years I learned how not to exist." She swallowed. "When he died, people called it an accident. But his brother didn't. He thinks I belong to him now." She finally looked at Jonah. Fear was there, but also resolve. "If he finds me," she said softly, "he won't stop." Jonah stood, anger cold and clean in his chest. "Then he won't leave this land," he said. "Because no one touches what's under my roof." She searched his face, measuring the truth in his words, and for the first time since she arrived, she believed she might survive the night. Jonah didn't sleep after he left her room. He sat in the chair by the front window, rifle across his knees, watching moonlight slide across the empty yard. The plains were quiet, but quiet had never meant safe to him. Not in war, not after, and not now, with a woman in the next room carrying wounds deeper than scars. By dawn, the wind had eased. Pale light crept in over the grasslands, turning the world silver and cold. The smell of coffee pulled him from his thoughts. Jonah turned to see Lydia at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair pinned tight again as if nothing had happened. A skillet hissed softly. Bacon, real bacon. The table was set for 2. "I hope you don't mind," she said without turning. Cooking helps when sleep doesn't. He sat slowly, as if the scene might vanish if he moved too fast. "I don't mind." They ate in a careful silence. Not awkward, just new. Jonah noticed how she flinched when he shifted too suddenly. How she kept her back straight, chin lifted, refusing to shrink. After breakfast, he saddled his horse. Lydia followed him to the yard, wrapping her shawl tighter against the cold. "I'd like to help," she said. "Garden, animals, whatever you'll allow." "You don't need permission," Jonah replied. "This is your home now." Something softened in her face. Not relief. Something braver. The next week settled into rhythm. Lydia worked steadily, quietly reshaping the house. Curtains appeared at the windows. A pot of flowers sat by the door. Jonah noticed the changes but didn't comment. He only felt them. Then winter came early. The storm struck hard and fast. Snow falling so thick it erased the world beyond the porch. By nightfall, the barn was half buried, the wind howling like something alive. They worked together without panic, securing shutters, carrying wood, checking animals by lantern light. Lydia didn't complain once, even when the cold cut through her gloves. When they reached the barn, one of the horses went down, panicked and trembling. Lydia knelt beside it without hesitation, speaking softly, steady hands calming the animal until it stood again. Jonah watched her then, not as someone fragile, but as someone forged. Back inside, snow melting from their clothes, Lydia laughed suddenly. A real laugh. Surprised, breathless. "That," she said, "was terrifying. And I've never felt more alive." They sat by the fire afterward, steam rising from mugs of coffee. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something else took shape. Trust. Quiet and unspoken. Later that night, Jonah woke to hear her crying again. Not screaming this time, just exhausted sobs. He knocked once and entered. This time he stayed. And for the first time since the war, Jonah Creed understood that guarding someone else's peace might finally quiet his own. Jonah pulled the chair closer to Lydia's bed and sat without a word. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her. He just stayed, solid and present, the way he wished someone had stayed for him years ago. The storm battered the house through the night. Wind slammed against the walls. Snow crept under the door. The world shrank to firelight and breathing. "It's always him," Lydia said at last, her voice muffled against the pillow. "Even dead, he finds me. He tells me I belong to him. That I always will." Jonah stared at the floor, his hands clenched. "He's lying." "Was he?" She sat up, eyes bright with tears. "I can't sleep without fear. I can't stand to be touched. I ran halfway across the country and still wake up begging." She laughed weakly. "What kind of wife does that make me?" You're not my wife, Jonah said gently. Not in the way you're thinking. This was never about ownership. It was about shelter. She studied him. And you? What kind of man needs shelter this far from the world? The question landed heavier than she knew. He leaned back, eyes on the firelight flickering under the door. I went to war at 18, he said quietly. Came back older than my father ever was. Learned how to kill before I learned how to live. She didn't interrupt. I got good at it, he continued. Too good. After the war, I kept doing what I knew. Hunting men. Ending them. Told myself it was justice. He swallowed. Truth is, it was easier than feeling. Lydia turned toward him, listening with the same steady courage she brought to everything else. There was a boy once, Jonah said, barely 16, crying for his mother. I ended it quick. People called that mercy. His voice dropped. I don't know if it was. Silence settled between them, thick but not heavy. You didn't become a monster, Lydia said finally. You survived what tried to turn you into one. Jonah looked at her then. Really looked. Not broken, not weak, just scarred and standing. We're alike, she said softly. Different wounds. Same ghosts. Outside, the storm eased for the first time. Snow still fell, but the wind lost its teeth. I'm afraid he'll come, Lydia whispered. His brother? He won't stop. Then he'll meet me, Jonah said, calm and certain. And he'll learn what it means to threaten what's under my protection. She hesitated, then reached out. Her hand hovered before touching his sleeve, light and unsure. Stay, she said. Just tonight. Jonah nodded. I'm not going anywhere. As dawn crept in pale and cold, Lydia finally slept. Jonah stayed awake, guarding more than a house. He was guarding the fragile beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both were already choosing. The blizzard loosened its grip by the third day. Snow still covered the land in deep, rolling drifts, but the wind had softened, leaving behind a strange, quiet beauty. Jonah stepped outside at dawn, breath fogging, the world pale and untouched. Behind him, the house stirred to life. Lydia joined him wrapped in her shawl, eyes scanning the white horizon. It looks peaceful, she said. It never stays that way, Jonah replied. But we use the calm when we get it. They checked the barn together. One of the mares was restless, breathing hard, sides twitching. Jonah knelt to examine her. But Lydia was already moving, speaking softly. Steady hands calming the animal. You've done this before, he said. My father kept horses, she replied. Before everything else. The work grounded them. Feed, water, repair. By mid-morning, they were both damp with melted snow and exhaustion, but neither complained. That evening, they sat by the fire with a deck of worn cards Lydia had found in a drawer. Jonah taught her to play, then to cheat just enough to win. You're terrible, she accused, smiling. You're learning, he countered. They were laughing, actually laughing, when the sound came. A faint cry, thin, almost lost to the wind. Jonah was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Lydia grabbed the lantern and followed before he could stop her. Outside, the snow swallowed sound and shape. 50 yards from the house, a horse stumbled and collapsed. A boy slid from the saddle and fell face first into the drift. Jonah knelt beside him. Easy, he said. You're safe. My family, the boy whispered. Wagon, stuck. My mother. Jonah didn't hesitate. Get him inside, he told Lydia. I'll harness the sled. They moved fast. Too fast to think about fear. The wagon was nearly buried a mile back. The woman inside barely conscious. 2 young girls clinging to her. Lydia climbed into the wagon without waiting for instruction, wrapping blankets around shaking bodies, her voice calm and firm. The journey back was brutal. Horses straining. Snow blinding. Jonah navigated by memory alone. Inside the house, chaos turned to careful order. Fire, warmth, slow thawing. Lydia directed everything with quiet authority while Jonah handled the physical work. Hours later, when the family slept safely by the fire, Lydia finally sank into a chair, trembling. You saved them, Jonah said. We did, she corrected. He looked at her then, truly seeing her, not as someone he protected, but as someone who stood beside him. Outside, the storm continued to fade. Inside, Jonah realized something had changed. This was no longer just survival. This was partnership. The family stayed 3 days. The storm lingered, unwilling to fully release the land. But the danger had passed. The woman, Mrs. Parker, regained her strength slowly, fingers still stiff with frostbite. Her daughters clung to Lydia like ducklings, following her from room to room. The boy Eli, barely 13, insisted on helping Jonah with the animals despite his weakness. "You don't owe me," Jonah told him. "Yes, sir," the boy replied, stubborn and earnest. "But I want to." Lydia watched them from the doorway, something warm and aching settling in her chest. When the snow finally broke and the road cleared enough to travel, Jonah hitched the wagon himself. The goodbye was harder than anyone expected. The girls cried openly. Lydia held them close, whispering promises she didn't know how to keep. Mrs. Parker took Jonah's hand. "You gave us our lives," she said. "That's not something we'll forget." After they left, the house felt too quiet again. That night, Lydia stood by the window long after dark. "I used to want children," she said softly. "Before." Jonah joined her, careful not to crowd. "And now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know if something like that can grow back." "Maybe it doesn't grow back," he said. "Maybe it grows forward." She looked at him then, eyes searching. "You're afraid too?" "Yes," Jonah said simply. The warning came 2 days later. A rider approached just before sunset, dust rising behind his horse. Jonah recognized him immediately. Ezra Cole from town. He never rode this far out unless it mattered. Ezra didn't dismount. "Man was asking about you," he said bluntly. "Paid money." Eastern accent. 3 others with him. Lydia's hand found Jonah's arm. Her grip was tight. "He said his name?" Jonah asked. "Samuel Hale," Ezra replied. "Said he was family." The name landed like a gunshot. Ezra glanced at Lydia, then back to Jonah. "Sheriff ran him off for now. But men like that don't come west to give up." Jonah nodded once. "Thank you." When Ezra rode away, silence rushed back in. "He found me," Lydia whispered. Jonah turned to face her fully. "No, he found us." That night, Jonah cleaned every weapon he owned. Lydia watched without comment, then surprised him by asking to learn. "If I'm staying," she said, voice steady, "I won't be helpless." He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to breathe, how to squeeze instead of pull. Her hands shook, but she didn't quit. "You won't have to use it," Jonah said. "I know," she replied. "But knowing how matters." As the moon rose over the frozen plains, Jonah realized the truth he hadn't spoken aloud. This was no longer a temporary arrangement. Whatever came next would test them both, and neither intended to run. The waiting was worse than the storm. 3 days passed with no sign of Samuel Hale, yet Jonah felt him everywhere. In the stillness before dawn, in the way Lydia paused at every distant sound, in the long looks they shared without speaking, both thinking the same thing. Jonah reinforced shutters and cleared sightlines around the house. Lydia helped without complaint, passing boards and nails, learning where he kept ammunition, memorizing angles and cover. Fear lived in her eyes, but it no longer ruled her. On the 4th morning, she surprised him. "I won't hide," she said over breakfast. "Not again." Jonah studied her carefully. "This isn't hiding. It's choosing ground." "I spent 6 years shrinking," she replied. "If he comes, I want him to see me standing." That afternoon, dust rose on the horizon. 4 riders approached at an unhurried pace, spreading wide as they came closer. Jonah recognized the posture instantly. Men who expected obedience. Men who carried violence like entitlement. The lead rider reined in just outside rifle range. Samuel Hale was tall and well-dressed, his coat too fine for the land beneath him. He smiled easily as if this were a social call. "Jonah Creed," he called. "I appreciate you keeping my sister-in-law comfortable." "She's my wife," Jonah replied. "And you're trespassing." Samuel laughed softly. Temporary arrangements confuse simple men. "Lydia belongs with her family." Lydia stepped onto the porch beside Jonah. Her spine was straight. Her chin lifted. "I don't belong to you," she said clearly. Samuel's smile vanished. "Careful," he warned. "You're speaking out of place." Jonah's rifle came up, not aimed, but ready. "You don't tell her where she belongs." Samuel's men shifted. One reached for his gun, then stopped when Jonah's eyes locked on him. "I'm offering a solution," Samuel said. "You walk away. I take what's mine. No one gets hurt." Lydia laughed once, cold, sharp. "You already hurt me. You don't get another chance." Samuel's gaze flicked to her, then back to Jonah. "You think you can protect her forever?" Jonah didn't raise his voice. I think you should leave. Silence stretched thin. Samuel dismounted slowly, boots crunching in the frost. I'll give you time, he said. 3 days. Then I come back with papers or men. Either way, she's coming with me. He mounted again and rode off, his men following. Lydia's breath shook when they were gone. Jonah turned to her. We don't run, he said. She nodded. We stand. But as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened across the plains, both knew the truth. The next time Samuel Hale returned, words would not be enough. The 3 days passed like a slow tightening rope. Jonah didn't waste them. He rode the perimeter at dawn and dusk, studying the land the way a man studies an opponent, where the ground dipped, where shadows gathered, where a rider might approach unseen. He marked every advantage and every weakness. Lydia prepared in her own way. She cleaned the house, but not from habit, from intention. She moved furniture to clear lines of sight. She placed lamps where night would not hide corners. She kept the rifle close, practicing until her shoulders ached and her hands steadied. They spoke little, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered had already been decided. On the third evening, Jonah returned from the barn to the smell of bread baking. Lydia stood at the counter, calm, focused as if this were any other day. You don't have to do that, he said. I want to, she replied. If tonight is hard, I want it to start with something normal. They ate quietly. When the sun slipped behind the hills, Jonah checked his weapons one final time. Lydia watched, then surprised him by stepping closer. If this ends badly, she said, I need you to hear this now. He looked at her. I didn't come here just to survive, she continued. I stayed because of you, because you saw me as a person, not something to be owned or fixed. Whatever happens, that matters. Jonah's throat tightened. It won't end badly. But even as he said it, hooves thundered in the distance. Samuel returned with more men this time, 6 riders spread wide, circling like they already owned the place. Lantern light flickered in the growing dark. Stay inside, Jonah told Lydia. No, she said calmly. Not this time. They stepped onto the porch together. Samuel rode forward, satisfaction etched into his face. I see you've thought about my offer. We have, Jonah said, and the answer hasn't changed. Samuel gestured, and one of his men dismounted, tossing a folded paper onto the dirt. Warrant, Samuel said. Forgery charges, murder, take your pick. Jonah didn't bend to read it. Lydia stepped forward instead. You bought that paper the same way you tried to buy me. Samuel's smile twisted. I'll drag you back east if I have to. Jonah moved then, placing himself half a step in front of her. You're done. Samuel's hand hovered near his gun. You won't shoot me. Too many witnesses. You're right, Jonah said. I won't. Lydia reached into her coat and pulled out the small pistol Jonah had given her. I will, she said quietly. The night went still. Samuel stared at her, disbelief flashing across his face. You don't have it in you. Lydia's hands were steady. You don't know me anymore. The pause stretched, fragile and dangerous, and somewhere in that silence the choice was made. No one moved. The lanterns flickered in the rising wind, casting long shadows across the frozen yard. Samuel's men watched Lydia with new caution now, no longer amused. They saw what Jonah had seen weeks ago. She was no longer running. Samuel laughed, but the sound lacked confidence. Put that down, he said. You'll regret it. I already regret letting you live in my head this long, Lydia replied. Jonah felt the moment narrowing, sharpening. He shifted slightly, angling his body so he could reach her if needed. So he could end this if it turned. Samuel stepped closer. Too close. That's enough, Jonah said. Leave now. Samuel's eyes hardened. You don't give orders to me. His hand dropped to his gun. The shot cracked through the night. Lydia fired first. The bullet tore through Samuel's hat, spinning it into the dirt. He froze, shock flashing across his face. His men recoiled instinctively, hands flying to weapons but not drawing. Jonah raised his rifle in the same instant, barrel steady, unblinking. The next one won't miss, Lydia said. Her voice didn't shake. This ends here. Samuel's breath came fast now. Rage warred with fear. You think you've won? He spat. I'll burn this place to the ground, Jonah stepped forward. No, he said quietly. You won't. Samuel drew. Jonah fired. The sound was deafening in the open night. Samuel staggered. Surprise etched across his face as he collapsed into the snow. His men backed away immediately, shock breaking whatever loyalty money had bought. One of them raised his hands. "We're done," he said quickly. This wasn't part of the deal. They mounted and rode hard, disappearing into the dark. Silence rushed back in. Lydia stood frozen, pistol still raised, breath shallow. Jonah reached her just as her legs gave out, catching her before she fell. "It's over," he said softly. "He can't hurt you anymore." Her fingers loosened around the pistol. "I shot at him," she whispered. "I didn't freeze." "You didn't," Jonah said. "You stood." They sat by the fire long into the night, Lydia wrapped in a blanket, Jonah cleaning his rifle with hands that no longer shook. Outside, the land lay quiet again. Near dawn, Lydia spoke. "I don't want to be brave anymore." Jonah looked at her. "You don't have to be. You can just be safe." She met his gaze. "With you?" "Yes," he said. "If you choose." She reached for his hand. This time she didn't pull away. The night that had begun in fear ended in something neither of them had expected. Freedom. Morning came quietly, as if the land itself was careful not to disturb what had changed. Jonah buried Samuel Hale at the edge of the property, far from the house. No marker, no prayer, just earth returning a violent man to silence. Lydia stood a short distance away, arms wrapped around herself, watching without satisfaction and without regret. "I don't feel anything," she said afterward. "Is that wrong?" "No," Jonah replied. "It means he no longer owns space in you." They spent the day cleaning what little damage had been done. A lantern broken, boot tracks in the frost, proof that fear had reached their door and failed to stay. By evening, the ranch looked like itself again, but something inside the house felt different. Lighter. That night, Lydia didn't return to her room. She stood in the doorway of Jonah's, hesitant but resolved. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore," she said. "Not because I'm afraid, because I choose not to be." Jonah didn't move. "We don't have to—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "That's why it matters." They moved slowly, carefully. Every touch asked, never taken. Jonah learned the map of her scars without flinching. Lydia learned that strength could be gentle without being weak. When they slept, it was tangled and warm and real. No nightmares, no screaming, just breath and quiet. Days turned into weeks. Spring crept across the plains, thawing the last of winter's grip. Lydia planted a garden behind the house, hands in the soil like a promise. Jonah repaired fences and rebuilt routines that now had meaning beyond habit. They rode into town together for the first time. Heads turned, whispers followed, but Lydia walked beside Jonah without lowering her eyes. At the general store, a woman pressed Lydia's hand. "I heard," she said softly. "You did right." Jonah felt something settle in his chest then. Not pride, belonging. One evening, Jonah fell ill. It started as a fever. By nightfall, it had him shaking, muttering names Lydia didn't recognize. Man from war, places soaked in memory. She stayed by his side, cooling his skin, holding his hands when pain racked him. "Don't leave me," she whispered into the dark. "Not after we found this." Near dawn, the fever broke. Jonah opened his eyes to find her asleep beside him, cheek pressed to his shoulder, fingers still tangled in his shirt. For the first time in his life, Jonah Creed understood what it meant to be needed, not for violence, not for fear, but for love. And he chose it. Every day after. Jonah healed slowly. The fever left him thinner, weaker, frustrated by how easily his strength had abandoned him. Lydia never rushed him. She read to him in the evenings, her voice steady and calm, grounding him when old memories threatened to pull him under. When he could finally stand again, she walked beside him across the yard, letting him lean without shame. "I'm not used to this," he admitted one afternoon. "Depending on someone." "You're not depending," she said. "You're trusting. There's a difference." Spring deepened. The grass returned first, then wildflowers dotting the hills like quiet celebration. Lydia's garden took shape, neat rows promising food and continuity. Jonah watched her work, realizing how much of the future she was planting with her hands. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Lydia sat across from him at the table, fingers folded tight. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Jonah stilled. "All right. I might be wrong," she continued, breath careful. "But I don't think I am." She met his eyes. "I think I'm with child." The words seemed to echo in the room. Jonah's first response wasn't joy. It was fear, sharp and honest. "I don't know how to be a father," he said quietly. "I know how to fight. I know how to survive." But a child? You know how to protect, Lydia said, and how to stay. That's enough to start. He reached across the table, covering her hands with his. If this happens, I'll give everything I have. You already are, she replied. The months passed with purpose. Jonah built a cradle from leftover pine, sanding every edge smooth. Lydia sewed tiny clothes by lamplight, humming songs she barely remembered learning. The ranch prospered not because Jonah pushed harder, but because life finally felt worth tending. When the baby came, it was during a summer storm. Thunder rolled as Lydia labored, gripping Jonah's hand, eyes fierce and unafraid. At dawn, their son cried into the world, strong and impatient. Jonah wept openly, holding him. We'll call him Thomas, Lydia said. For my father. A good man. Thomas Creed, Jonah repeated. A better life. Years moved forward like seasons always do. The ranch grew, the house filled with laughter. Jonah's reputation shifted from feared to trusted. Lydia taught children from town, her classroom small but full of light. They didn't forget the past. They simply refused to live inside it. One evening, older now, Jonah and Lydia sat on the porch watching their son chase fireflies. We survived, Lydia said softly. No, Jonah replied, squeezing her hand. We lived. And that, they both knew, was the harder victory. Time did what time always does. It kept moving. The ranch became more than land and fences. It became a place people spoke of with warmth, a place where help was given without keeping score. Jonah's hand slowed with age, but his presence still carried weight. He no longer needed a gun to keep order. His word was enough. Lydia's classroom grew. Children rode miles to sit at her tables, learning letters, numbers, and something harder to teach, that they mattered. Jonah watched her from the doorway more than once, pride quiet and deep. They buried losses too, a winter that took a newborn too soon, a drought that tested their resolve. Grief came, but it no longer hollowed them out. They knew how to stand together inside it. Their children grew strong. Thomas with his mother's eyes and his father's steadiness. Others followed. Each different. Each loved without condition. The house that once felt like a fortress now rang with voices, with footsteps running down halls that had once known only silence. Years later, gray in their hair and peace in their bones, Jonah and Lydia sat on the porch as the sun sank low over the plains. The same wind moved through the grass, but it carried laughter now. Horses snorted in the distance. A child called for his mother. Do you ever think about that first night? Lydia asked quietly. Jonah nodded. Every time I hear the wind. She smiled faintly. I thought I was bringing ruin to your door. You brought truth, he said, and courage, and a life I didn't know how to ask for. She rested her head against his shoulder. We were both running, and we both stopped, Jonah replied. A small boy, grandson now, ran up the steps, breathless with excitement. Grandpa, Grandma, he said, grinning wide. The foals standing. They rose together, slower than they once had, but steady. In the barn, the young filly wobbled on thin legs, stubborn and determined, refusing to stay down. Lydia laughed softly. What should we name her? The boy asked. Jonah and Lydia exchanged a look that held a lifetime. Hope, Lydia said, because that was what arrived with her all those years ago. Not loudly, not easily, but real. As night settled over the land they had claimed through choice rather than fear. Jonah took Lydia's hand. Ready? He asked. She squeezed back. Always. They walked home together, past fences built to last, toward a house that had learned how to hold joy. The past was quiet now, not forgotten, but finally at rest. If this tale stirred your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Tales from the Frontier, where history rides the frontier. Courage is tested and love refuses to die. Until the next tale, ride on, partner.